Step 1 is to simulate a sort of heath in a contained space. The second step is to keep snails in there of a certain kind, not just garden snails. Step 3 would be to capture a female glowworm and a male glowworm, and probably plenty more, during the breeding season of the glowworm. Next step would be to bring them back into the simulated heath area and then allow them to breed. And then the step after that would finally be looking after the larvae which are born, and then keeping the glowworms consistently fed on snails until the festival comes round in Bournemouth in October. So, from my research, it turns out that this is quite the difficult task and takes a lot of steps. So ultimately, I have to come to terms with the fact that quite early, rearing glowworms is not going to be an easy thing, and they are not really domesticatable at all. So there is a chance that this might not go as well as I was hoping to. However, I still think it's going to be important to attempt it anyway and see how far we can get. Hopefully we'll get some positive results. There is still a lot of dispute in terms of why the glowworm numbers are dropping so rapidly, but the general consensus seems to be a shifting towards warmer climates in this country, and also the development of light pollution in towns and villages. Both of these things interfere with how glowworms try to reach their prey, and it also interferes with how noticeable their mating rituals are with the glowing. So the jury is still out on whether this is 100% the absolute cause, but this seems to be agreed on by a lot of people. So hopefully through my research, which I'll be doing in the next few videos, we may even learn something just on a very small scale of how glowworms actually develop and whether they can be kept and bred without these things affecting them too much. I am back in Turbury Common, because as you will remember last time I dug up what I suspected was the correct peat moss, and I got in touch with my friend Mark Spencer at the Bournemouth Natural Sciences Society, and he confirmed that yes, in fact, I do have the correct substance, except I collected more of the unrotten moss, or normal kind of sphagnum moss at the top, so I have come back to collect more of the actual rotted substrate underneath. And now I'm going to get back pretty much to the exact same place and dig up more of that substrate and perhaps try to collect just more of the material that I can to simulate the heath in the fish tank. So now that I'm actually starting to dig up the peat and get deeper with it, I'm starting to understand more about why looking at peat can be quite confusing online. Peat starts off as this sphagnum moss here, and what's interesting about sphagnum moss is that it's very densely packed with water. It can contain up to 30 or 40 times the sort of, I believe, the weight or the volume of water compared to its actual size, and that's because of the fibres that the moss is made of. But as the moss starts to decay and become browner, it starts to settle into the ground more, and the more it decays, the more the vegetation becomes browner. And this is a very slow process, but you keep going down and down, and this is where you start to see what basically looks like soil, and this is what you might actually be sold more at garden centres and things like that. So you have the moss, the sphagnum moss, and then the peat moss, and then the peat soil. So I'm mainly collecting a lot of the soil, but I think I also want to collect a little bit of the moss and then some of just the normal sphagnum moss to go on top. Okay, so I've actually collected quite a lot of peat now, so I'm essentially just going to start filling the tank with the most sort of rotten soil-like stuff first, and then going on to the lighter, greener stuff, and then after that, should be time to add things like moss and lichen, and maybe even a couple of plants more related to the heathland. Well, I'll have to see how much of this can become a miniature heath. It's looking quite unusual so far, but it does look like the boggy part that you might find in a heathland, so I'm quite happy with that so far. I found a few of these plants just starting to grow in the boggy areas. I don't know what it is exactly, but I'm going to place a few of them. So for the next video, I hope to collect some more of the mosses and lichens and more of the above ground content of a heath area, which should hopefully lead on to collecting the snails, which will be the food. I'm very happy to have the substrate and a few of the mosses coming through, because seeing this in its container, everything's starting to make a bit more sense, and it's grounded me in an actual project here. Okay, so it's about 3 AM and I've just woken up, headed back into the garden. Thankfully, my snail has come out of hiding after a couple of days, and I can see him nibbling on one of the dying plants here.